Today we are going to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried, the crypto kingpin, the mastermind behind the $40 billion FTX fraud, stealing $10 billion worth of customer deposits from 1 million customers, the largest fraud of this generation. But for the most interesting part of the story is not the private jet, not the celebrity, it's the psychology behind Sam Bankman-Fried. What made him into the greatest swindler of this generation? By the way, I'm Sunil Kavouri. I've been investing in the cryptocurrency markets since 2016. I lost over 1.8 million pounds to the FTX fraud. You may have seen me on FTX documentaries such as the BBC Panorama, the Tucker Carlson documentaries, CNBC, Financial Times. To help me decipher the psychology and what created the monster Sam Bankman-Fried, I am joined by David Morris, the author of the upcoming book, Stealing the Future, Sam Bankman-Fried, Elite Fraud and the Cult of Techno Utopia. I would like to thank Paradex, the decentralized crypto exchange who is sponsoring this episode. Decentralized exchanges avoid you giving control of your crypto to a centralized exchange. You remain in control of your private keys, not the exchange. This means your crypto always remains in your control, so avoids the risk of FTX type fraud. Paradex's vision is to be the everything app for crypto. Spot, perps, options with deep liquidity, self-custody, and capital efficiency. Trade 250 markets on a super exchange with better than centralized exchange liquidity, institutional grade privacy, all on a fast blockchain. Paradex has a number of exciting features for traders to use, such as vaults. Vaults are where you can deposit your capital to generate passive income. Paradex has their own vault with $50 million locked up, and user community-led vaults which generate a return based on their investment strategy. But remember guys, crypto futures options are risky. Always do your own research before investing and only invest what you can afford to lose. This is not intended to be financial advice, and always consult a professional about your local country rules and with your regulators. Hi guys, so today I'm joined by David Morris to talk about the psychology and what created this monster, Sam Bankman-Fried. David Morris is the author of the upcoming book, Stealing the Future, Sam Bankman-Fried, Elite Fraud, and the Cult of Techno Utopia. Hi, David.
Hey,
how
Sunil.
you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'd love to see your book.
Yeah, so we can show it now. I actually have. It doesn't come out until November 11th, but I have copies that I got early, and it's really exciting. And obviously, you've been very crucial to helping me, and you are featured in the book in a really critical passage having to do with margin lending. And yeah, so it's an amazing thing to have it in my hand. One of the things that I was joking about is like it is nice and big. It's 340 pages.
Wow!
And it is up for pre-order on Amazon. You're getting a real deal. It's a book and a weapon. So
Yeah. Awesome. Exciting stuff. So I read a little bit about your background, but how did you move from a degree in sociology and technology, becoming a famed crypto journalist with technical expertise?
I keep hearing somebody referred to me as a micro celebrity the other day, which is a little uncomfortable, but I guess I need to deal with that. Yeah, so I actually sort of set out in life hoping to be an academic philosopher, essentially, or sociologist / philosopher, and got a PhD with a heavy grounding in social science, and particularly, and this is going to be a turnoff to some people, but hopefully it's not too big of a bad red flag, but studied a lot of continental philosophy, people like Sigmund Freud, Jacques Lacan, and then Jean Baudrillard features really heavily in this book, having to do with his discussions of the economy and symbols, and so got into that kind of deep stuff. But as I think I pretty correctly predicted about 15 years ago, academia unfortunately has become a harder and harder career, and I've never been great with like structures and authority and things like that. And so I was, but most importantly, I was really more interested in writing and just being a good writer, and academia really does not encourage or reward that. And so I went out on my own and managed to, very fortunately, no pun intended, I started writing for Fortune. That was my first sort of like extended gig, and then I did eventually become a staff writer.
Yeah, but you started writing very early on. I think before like 2013 in the crypto industry?
Yeah, so I was writing about all kinds of things for Fortune, but honestly, I mostly got that gig. I was not actually an employee at first. I was just doing some news desk stuff, but I got that because largely I was like tuned into crypto. I started writing about crypto in 2013. Very interesting, and again, like pretty informed by my academic background, because my training was partly in sociology, but also a lot of like law and regulatory stuff, actually specifically going back to, I'm a big music nerd too, and so I became very interested in the copyright issues around hip hop, and I wound up going to grad school and studying with this guy named Kembrew McLeod, who wrote a really influential book in the mid 2000s about the sort of use of copyright in sampling. And so some of those like legal and regulatory issues were always baked into my work. And then I became familiar with kind of the technology behind crypto and became really fascinated with it, largely through the lens of, I don't know how widely this name resonates, but this guy Marshall McLuhan, who was a media theorist working in Canada in the 1970s, 1960s, and commenting on kind of the way that, for example, consuming television shapes your view of the world. The medium is the message is his famous catchphrase. And that viewpoint is a substantial part of kind of just my life's work. This idea that the way technology shapes how you think is not neutral, that there is something about the structure of these things that impact society. And so I saw, Bitcoin and crypto very early on, and I was like, oh, this is a totally uncensorable global financial network that is like self-sustaining. It's going to have a huge impact. Yeah. And unfortunately, instead of buying a bunch of it, I made the choice to write about it. So that has cost me, but I couldn't be happier with the way it's all worked out.
Oh, no, it's awesome. You definitely got into it earlier than me. I mean, I started investing in Bitcoin in 2016, but heard of it in 2015. So few years before me.
I mean, still, like, I'm getting to the stage, and I don't know exactly how to articulate this, but in terms of my seniority in crypto, I'm getting to the stage where I feel like I've actually been in the space long enough to start kind of losing perspective, as in, like, I take a lot of things for granted that people just don't know about, and I have to, it's kind of like the opposite of being too new and figuring things out. It's like I almost know too much. It's a...
Yeah, exactly. And especially with this upcoming book and... all this, you spent 3 years living, breathing, researching the FTX fraud.
Give or take. Well, actually, no. So this is an interesting part of the story is that, I reported on a bunch of centralized exchange frauds like before FTX, like some of your listeners will maybe remember Quadriga CX, which was this very sensationalistic, like Canadian exchange where the CEO like flew to India and died, and he was the only person with all the private keys supposedly.
Really? Wow.
And so like that's like still kind of a mystery. We don't actually necessarily know that he's totally dead. Anyway, Gerald Cotton, look it up. It's a fascinating story.
That's fascinating.
But like by that point, I had kind of become.
When was that? What year was that?
Quadriga CX. Maybe it was like 2019. Maybe I honestly don't remember. But something like that. But the point being that, like, I had sort of seen these centralized exchange scams, and at the same time, centralized exchanges are not the most interesting sort of technological or like use case frontier in crypto. And so I at the time, and I was a staff writer at CoinDesk by this time, or actually rewind slightly. when Sam Bankman-Fried was rising, it was actually, you know, the middle of the pandemic. And at that time, I was a staff reporter for Fortune, and I was mostly writing about vaccine development and distribution. So I was writing about, like, you know, I've written about a bunch of stuff other than crypto. I've done investigations into, you know, Tesla accounting. I wrote about what looked like fraud at Nikola Motor before that got exposed and that guy got convicted.
Wow.
So, you know, crypto is what I've kind of focused on, but certainly not exclusive. Anyway,
and also, so you merged the crypto crime scandals with, I guess you merged the crime scandals with crypto because your expertise is in uncovering scandals, and
scams and specifically financial stuff, like, you know, looking at financial structures and being like, that's not quite right. The most fun one, which it's so disappointing, but in whatever it was, early 2022, I guess, I wrote about Luna and Do Kwon and was like, you know, you can just look at this and tell that it's like a Ponzi scheme / perpetual motion machine. And then like 2 weeks after I wrote my big analytical piece about that, the whole thing blew up. And I give myself some credit for actually taking him down. Because, you know, it was CoinDesk. It's like a prominent outlet. People were definitely paying attention. But unfortunately, he pled guilty, so there will not be a trial for Do Kwon. Which I'm bummed about. But
exactly. That would have been fun. And then especially because of all his dirty laundry would have come out in the trial.
I mean, we did get a lot in that one, so we kind of know. Anyway, we don't have to get into Do Kwon, but like he did, it's one of the classic cases, and this is kind of, you know, maybe we can start talking about bigger themes here. But
exactly.
You know, he posed as just like SBF, right? He posed in a different but pretty similar way. Do Kwon posed as this genius, and like his idea was bad publicly, like you could tell that it wasn't a real thing, but he also like actually committed real fraud on the back end. So in Do Kwon's case, we know that he like falsified all these transactions that were supposed to be going through Chai, this payment system. And, that's like, I think such a common pattern where either somebody is like, basically, if somebody is posing as a genius and really like selling you on that concept, like there's a huge possibility that they're doing some kind of fraud in the background to prop up that image, especially if what they're saying doesn't make sense, you know.
Exactly, because I remember when the first time, and then we can go into your more details about. In fact, we could have like 2 episodes, because I can record enough. But the thing is, what I actually would have loved to read that CoinDesk article. When I became suspicious of Do Kwon was when, I mean, I wasn't on Twitter much, but, you know, I would come occasionally. And I heard that he was using funds from a stable coin to purchase Bitcoin. And I was like, this makes no sense. I was like,
I mean,
it's like illogical. And then I recall all these crypto Twitter, all these, you know, pro Bitcoin guys, and Bitcoin went up, rallied a lot as a result of him announcing that. And I was thinking, this is insane. What happens when Bitcoin starts falling? He hasn't got enough reserves to cover his stable coin. This is a Ponzi. It's literally a stable coin whereby the stable coin has to be fixed to the dollar price, but Bitcoin is so volatile. Yes, it's all great when Bitcoin goes up. And then, but when it falls, that's it. It's the end of the Ponzi. And
I mean, the second, if we maybe should do another episode because the contemporary version of that, just to kind of put a little pin in it for later, is like we have all these Bitcoin treasury companies. We have slightly different, but Ethereum treasury companies, and they're all trading at like 2x NAV. So it's really weird to see it like in a slightly different and much more public version now.
Oh no, absolutely! It's like MicroStrategy, and then the recent one by Tom Lee. And I recently saw. I think I saw someone suggest that Tom Lee was using options to acquire Ethereum, and that's where he was able to build up the Ethereum. It's like a leverage, but again, it's a Ponzi. It's a Ponzi. If that's the case, I'm not saying it is or not.
Well, I'll say one thing, and then I can kind of point somebody. So the Tom Lee, the ETH thing, and the reason that MicroStrategy made sense in 2020 was that there was no Bitcoin ETF, but now there's a Bitcoin ETF. So like the premium is illogical. Tom Lee's thing, there's still no Ethereum ETF unless I've missed something huge. So, or I mean, there's like, I think it's one in Canada maybe. But there is a slight premium because you have like there's no other market access. So, the ETH treasury company makes a little bit more sense because you still don't have an Ethereum ETF. So there is a premium that makes a certain kind of sense there for that market access. But I co-write a newsletter with Austin Campbell. By the time this episode comes out, we will have published a pretty big deep dive into these treasury companies. The newsletter is called Zero In, and you can hopefully there will be a link below.
There'll be a link below, so all viewers, please check on the link.
And unfortunately, I doubt that my words alone will be enough to blow these companies up the way they helped blow up Luna, but you never know. So maybe by the time this comes out, they'll all be done.
I'm very suspicious about the treasury companies. I'm excited to see that. I just think something's not right. They're playing on, and particularly actually, you have companies which are trading at like maybe $50 million market cap, and they say, we're going to buy $5 billion worth of Ethereum. It's like, okay,
and it's I mean, I'm not complaining, and unfortunately I don't hold a ton of crypto at this point, but it has been nice to see like what I do hold just getting pumped. I mean, we can put some market insight here for anybody who's a trader, because I think that like a lot of the rally that we're seeing right now is definitely like driven by either the material purchases made by these treasury companies or just the narrative that they're going to buy all of this and people getting ahead of that. And, I think that going into the fall, some of that is, I think I would fade it if I was in a position to do that.
I agree. Usually it's front running the actual purchases. You see a median. In fact, when it's like kind of a sell the news event generally.
Yeah, absolutely.
But awesome. No, I'm really excited to have you on, and let's dig in. So obviously we talked about your share. You've seen a fair share of frauds, and we connected back in 2023 following the FTX collapse. And it was when you were working at CoinDesk. So CoinDesk was the crypto journal which broke the story about the Alameda balance sheet, I believe on the 2nd of November, 2022, which
Ian Allison got this critical scoop that really like bit by bit, it took about a week for it all to unwind, but it really blew the whole thing up.
Talk me a bit through that.
It's interesting because it wasn't like a smoking gun. The balance sheet that Ian got was for Alameda Research, not for FTX. What was critical about it was that, and you're going to have to read the book to really get the like nuanced nitty gritty, because it is incredibly complicated in some ways. But Alameda Research was found, or at least in this balance sheet, showed to have about $5 billion worth of tokens that had actually been issued effectively by FTX, including FTT, which was like the exchange token that they had issued. And that looked really bad because we already knew that Alameda and FTX had, the same owner. Sam Bankman-Fried owned both of them. He claimed repeatedly to not have any role or really much awareness of what was going on at Alameda Research. This was found at trial to be just like an abject lie. Yeah. He was directing specific activities there. He was very aware of what was going on. And the other scoop that sort of came out of CoinDesk at the same time as Ian's was Tracy Wang really uncovering how close the relationships were between the FTX and Alameda teams. They lived in the same apartment effectively, or larger apartment. Yeah. And I believe I'm a little hazy on this still, but I think, everybody kind of knew that Carolyn Ellison and Bankman-Fried had some kind of relationship. Like it was kind of in the ether, but I think that Tracy's report was the first to say like, no, they were actually like dating and romantically linked in a public venue. Wow. And so it was really this 1-2 punch of like financially Alameda has all of these FTX generated assets, which, the way that I think about it, because one of the reasons that I pivoted so hard from, social science into finance was that I was affected personally by the 2008 financial crisis. And I became very fascinated by just like financial machinations and fraud. And what FTX looks like from a certain perspective more than anything else is Enron. people who, I mean, again, it's so complicated that the details are overwhelming, but Enron effectively created these separate shell companies that were supposed to be third parties. You're supposed to have a third party who's buying your assets, who's valuing them fairly in the open market, right? And Enron managed to skirt regulations to basically create things that looked like unrelated third parties buying their assets, including buying their debt and putting value on that debt that then like helped them smooth revenue and hide bad debt off the books. And Alameda was a related third party in a very similar sense, that it looked independent. Bankman-Fried claimed it was independent. It was engaged in financial transactions with FTX in a capacity that it should have been independent, but it actually really wasn't. So that relationship was really the heart of the fraud, and Ian's leak blew it up. Now, we later found out, which is the hilarious part, is that the Alameda balance sheet that Ian Allison got was actually fake itself. So this was, there was a notorious episode recounted in detail at trial. And speaking of everything being very connected, Bankman-Fried, very close to the final collapse of this whole situation, ordered Carolyn Ellison to basically create 6 or 7 different balance sheets that like moved things around and made them look as good as possible, and like hid the fact that they had loaned $5 billion to their own executives in a personal capacity, which is like, even before, Ian and Tracy got their scoops, and then the whole thing blew up on November 12th. And then there was a lot of waiting. People will remember that, like, there was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of like, is he going to get away with it? Are people going to recognize?
Actually, that I think that's what I want to talk about a lot, because I recall it was 11th of November. It went bankrupt. It was obviously an extremely dark time for myself and lots of creditors. And Sam Bankman-Fried, he went on his media tour. And he went on Good Morning America. He went and spoke with Andy Sorkin. He's getting applauses. Bill Ackman and Kevin O'Leary saying that, he's telling the truth. Nothing's gone wrong. And honestly, I think you wrote an article on, was it the 30th of November, 2022? Yeah. And you laid out all his crimes. He said you literally the only person, I think it's still probably the best article written.
Well, thank you.
Honestly, I think it's the best article still written about what exactly Sam Bankman-Fried did and his crimes. Please go.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't completely psychic. There are a few things in there that didn't hold up.
Absolutely. There's a few things which we didn't know anyway, but generally, please walk me through that.
But it's really, it's about intent, and the article was called FTX's collapse was a crime, not an accident. And I was told, and I still believe this to be the case, that I think it was the most widely read thing, at least in some readership groups, the most widely read thing that CoinDesk ever published. And it was very strange because... And we could talk about this too, because part of the anger over Sam Bankman-Fried's situation was sort of politicized, right? Because at the time in the U.S., he was believed to be like this big Democratic donor, and that turned out to be a little bit more complicated. But, Biden was in office at the time, and so there was a lot of right-wing commentary to the effect that, he's not going to get prosecuted because he's like politically protected. Yeah. And there might have been some element of that, but not for him, but for his parents, and we can talk about that. I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried did not have the protection that he might have thought he had. But, this story went viral in a very weird way for me because, my politics are very much not right-wing. But, like, Ann Coulter was, like, retweeting, being like, hey, look at what the Democrats are doing. So, and sometimes you just have to take the win where you can find it.
No, honestly.
But the most important thing in that article, and, this is not stuff that I had discovered, right? The bankruptcy proceeding had already started, and it was becoming very clear what had happened. But the most obvious thing, which I call the smoking gun, and I still to this day think it's just like clear evidence of criminality, was they loaned themselves a bunch of money from the corporate coffers. That's what you do when you're planning for the thing to collapse. And then like even there are, and you and I both love talking about his parents, and we'll get to it, but there's some communications from Joe Bankman, who sort of helped structure a lot of the transfers that took place. He's a tax lawyer, and it's a total Breaking Bad situation, because this guy's a career tax lawyer talking about kind of fighting tax evasion, and then his son founds a company, and he's the one now doing the tax evasion.
Tax evasion, yeah.
And one of his notes is about how they structure these loans. This like wound up in filings of some sort, and Joe at a certain point is like, we're gonna structure these as loans, and then Sam is gonna give. And this is like, he's going to give us $10 million as a gift. And then Joe mentions, like, maybe we'll just, at some point, we'll write off the loans. And there were multiple references from, like, Ryan Salame to Nishad Singh. Also, I think, at a certain point said, like, it didn't seem like they expected me to actually pay back the loans.
And he got a loan of over $550 million.
I think Nishad, that sounds about right. He was definitely on the smaller end. Sam, it was like, he got like 3. Ryan Salame also got some. Carolyn Ellison did not get any, because all of these people are also, sexist and racist, but that's a different conversation. Yeah, like that was really where it was clear that there was like some crime happening, and it didn't take like a massive genius detective to see it, really.
No, it's a great article, and I think the key thing was that it was written at a time when there were a lot of puff pieces in the New York Times. A lot of big news outlets were trying to muddy the waters of the criminality of Sam Bankman-Fried. And I knew, you knew, but most people didn't. In fact, even right up to the trial, I recall I had an interview with Al Jazeera, and the TV presenter, he was asking me questions, and he said, and even CNBC, I went on CNBC, and they all thought, okay, is he guilty or not? And it wasn't obvious to them, and it was obvious to us. But I think your article really laid out the reasons for his crimes.
I'm very glad it had an impact.
No, you definitely did. And it definitely helped me and a lot of FTX creditors and customers feel that there was hope. So, no, thank you so much, David.
And then like 2 weeks later, he was arrested, and we had the whole extradition process and all of that. And I mean, I don't claim that I had a definitive impact there, but I'll say I like am 5% responsible for him, actually facing justice. So I'll take that, No,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, your article went viral, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I think that it definitely gave prosecutors probably a starting point to.
I mean, and people have, and you, I'm sure, have complicated feelings about him. But again, I mean, the real credit there goes to, John Ray and the bankruptcy team, who, whatever happened afterwards, they did at least like pull the guts out and look at things, and they reported on it, and they told us what was going on. Like that was, that was key as well.
Yes, exactly. Because I think the first bankruptcy hearing, he actually literally referred to the loans. Yes, which is literally, that's it. He
referred to the loans, and he also, the other really notable thing was that, John Ray III, the bankruptcy CEO, I think one of the very first things he said was like, this is the most disorganized company I've ever seen. And speaking of Enron, he was the guy who actually managed Enron's bankruptcy. And so he really knew what he was talking about when he said like, this is a complete mess and seems really sketchy. So he signaled there as well.
What was your reason for writing your book? And I'd love to know, because I know I have a feeling that it's based mostly on the psychology behind Sam Bankman-Fried. However, please.
Well, I mean, I'll quickly, 2 things. Like, yes, Michael Lewis is a very confusing and weird aspect of this story, because as much as there was, to give them the benefit of the doubt, there were definitely stories in like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal that like sort of danced around. I mean, the mainstream media is in a corner and really has trouble just like speaking obvious truth sometimes.
Yeah.
And, the journalists might have been making their best effort and just couldn't quite get it across the finish line to make strong claims like I was able to in my columnist situation. But Michael Lewis is a different category. I mean, he really like went out of his way to muddy the waters, I think is exactly the right term, and really kind of copped to it as well, because his book came out literally the day, I believe, or the day before, something like that, the trial started. And in his interviews, and this is just like, I mean, there's no other word for it but shameful. I mean, he in his interviews about the book said that he wished for it to be, quote, a letter to the jury, which, even in a vacuum is troubling, because, of course, in the United States, at least, juries are supposed to be sequestered. They're not supposed to be looking at the media. They're not supposed to be looking for third-party sources of information. Essentially, I'm sorry that this sounds so histrionic, but, like, essentially what Michael Lewis was saying was that this book is intended to be jury tampering, and in a real trial, jury tampering leads to a mistrial. So it's just an insane thing, and there's a whole raft of other stuff that came out about Michael Lewis, sort of in tandem with this, having to do with like his treatment of the story in The Blind Side, and basically it's almost like this one thing wound up unmasking this guy as not quite the great journalist that many of us, people my age, I mean, I'm in my mid-40s, so I've been reading his work for almost 20 years, and especially his stuff about the stock market and traders and things like that has been very formative of people's impressions. But, I've talked to people since then who are like, he wrote Liar's Poker because he wasn't really good at the job, and he didn't actually understand all that much about what was going on. And then has just like, the Bankman-Fried book, he just did not understand anything that was happening right in front of his face. And it was really devastating, because he had so much access to this family. He was having dinner with them on a regular basis. And in the courtroom, you could tell when he only came a couple times. He didn't watch the trial very much, or at least he wasn't like in the room or in the courtroom. It was clear that he was very warm with Bankman-Fried's parents. Like, they had a relationship, and he was not, even before the book came out, Lewis did this appearance at the FTX conference in Crypto Bahamas where he's like, oh, you're so great, essentially. And, this Bloomberg journalist, Zeke Fox, even at the time said, like, this really seems inappropriate, the way he's there supposedly as a journalist. I mean, this is like 2021, I think.
Yes.
So, Lewis, I guess, had just started the work on his book, and he's just like so fascinated by Sam. And so to your original question,
so he kind of idolized. Do you think he idolized him?
He completely, he was completely enthralled,
mesmerized.
And so this is the psychology. Like,
yes,
I think Michael Lewis really represents a much broader sweep of people who were hypnotized by Sam Bankman-Fried. And, I think my thesis in the book, and I also highly recommend Brady Dale's book on FTX to anybody who really wants to get into the nitty-gritty. But, Brady talked to Sam a lot before things fell apart. Brady is a reporter for Axios, another very long-time crypto reporter, also just hardcore on the financial end. His book is amazing. And he really thinks that, the entire pose of being autistic, which, we got these fake semi-diagnoses from both his personal therapist and his mother in the clemency letters right before his sentencing. Bankman-Fried was never actually diagnosed with autism in any medical sense that I think we're aware of. Yes. It was his personal therapist, who was operating without a license in the Bahamas, by the way, and just supposedly, allegedly prescribing Adderall to anybody who asked. So there's that. And then his mother said he has autism-like behaviors, but Brady sort of floats the theory, and I think I agree with him here, that it's the exact opposite, that Bankman-Fried really knows what people want to see in a Silicon Valley genius, and plays that role very well for the period from 2018 to 2022, where he's trying to convince people to invest in him and convince people that he knows the future. And so that's the psychology of it from the mass perspective of here's how frauds work. And a lot of the book is how are you getting tricked by the frauds? But it's psychology on the one hand, and it's philosophy on the other. And this is really a huge focus of the book, is effective altruism. Effective altruism is the ideology that Bankman-Fried was supposedly, an adherent to. He believed in it. And what it boils down to in very simple terms I mean, if you really look at it, it boils down to nothing. Because their claim is that if you do enough randomized, controlled, scientific experimental trials on the results of financial donations to different philanthropies, you can actually target the most effective, quote unquote, applications of donated money and then change the world that way. And there are a lot of ways in which this is sort of nonsensical. The most obvious one being that while 20 years ago, there was a certain level of legitimacy to the critique that nonprofits didn't do enough, trials and experiments, that has been mostly, or that has been picked up. There's a lot of trials, a lot of surveys. That happens all the time. Effective altruists have no unique claim to being results-based in their philanthropy. What they do have a unique claim to is having absolutely no interest in working with activists who are not corporate stakeholders. They only work with companies. Yeah. They only work within the framework of investments that are going to gain in value. So, for example, and other people have said that effective altruism might be the first philosophy to entirely meld activism with investment capital. And there's a great example that other people have written about, and I talk about the context in my book, but effective altruism comes substantially out of the movement to promote veganism and to discourage meat eating, which I as a sentiment I can get on board with. But their methods for doing this are really sort of condescending white savior, I think, is pretty much the nut of it. Yeah. And they had a major campaign as an example of just how basically this idea that you can predict everything through experiments leads them to think that they can operate with no actual knowledge of the complexities of what's going on on the ground in these places where they're trying to make a difference. So the classic example is there was a big push by effective altruists, I think going back to sort of more 2017, 2018, to encourage plant-based diets in Brazil. Like they were really targeting Brazil specifically. Because it's because it's where the rainforest is there, and so there's kind of this direct impact. But they did this by trying to get people to eat like Impossible burgers, like to eat this like fake sort of scientific meat rather than like shifting to a whole foods plant-based diet, for example. And that's because a lot of these effective altruists stock in Impossible and these other companies that were going
financial.
So it's really this like sort of they're feeding things back into the money machine. Yes. And that became really obvious when, Will MacAskill, one of the figureheads of this movement, who has basically since been defenestrated from all of his posts, except for his actual professorship at Oxford. But, he was like playing roles like trying to introduce Sam Bankman-Fried to Elon Musk to help facilitate SBF investing in the Twitter takeover. So like there's just such a mix of... Oh, and I actually left out the most important part of the Brazil thing, which is that people in Brazil don't eat hamburgers. It's not like a substantial portion of like their sort of culinary culture. Yet these effective altruists go down there and they're like, you should be eating not just hamburgers, but these fake hamburgers. So they're just like not engaging on the ground with anything. And in general, the sort of mindset of effective altruism, which also crosses over with this whole other thing called rationalism, and it's something that Sam talked about all the time in insane ways, is like they all believe that everything can be figured out from first principles. That means I don't actually know anything, but I'm a logical thinker, so I can just figure it out. And that really manifested in Sam's behavior in ways that are hilarious. Primarily, he did not think his lawyers knew anything about how to navigate the legal system. And basically, he hung himself that way because after his arrest, he immediately after the collapse and before his arrest, he started doing all these media interviews where he was lying the entire time.
Yes.
His lawyers, and he acknowledged this, his lawyers were telling him to not do this because once you put that stuff on the record, then your criminal trial, you have to actually say the same thing. Otherwise, you just look like a liar. Yes. And so he was trapped in this fake story that had to do with the margin lending accounts.
Yes, correct.
From the very beginning because he didn't listen to his lawyers. And then, of course, the other hilarious, honestly, and like, if it's not clear, I think this is a bad person. I think he's got some serious, neurological and like personality disorders. But I think
I believe he's a psychopath. Literally.
Yeah, I mean, sociopath at the very least. I think that, like,
yeah, I should say, yeah, he's a sociopath.
I mean,
yeah.
like, I only say that because I don't think psychopath is a medically acknowledged term anymore.
Okay,
I think they're just all sociopaths.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think Sam doesn't have an innate sense of right and wrong, and I think that that is an important note for the effective altruism movement, because a lot of the converts to it, according to members and former members, are like sort of smart kids from the American Midwest, South, and West Coast who, in many cases, were raised in religious households and lost their religion and then needed something essentially to replace that sort of top-down ethical framework. It's kind of like, tell me how to do the right thing. And in effective altruism, what they're telling you is they're teaching you utilitarianism, which is you've learned. I'm imagining a conversation with one of these sort of religious converts where it's like, you've learned the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
Now you don't believe in God anymore. So where do you get your new 10 Commandments? Well, it's not from this sense of like every human being having individual value and you needing to treat them with dignity and respect. Because apparently fuck that for most of these people. Like that is not where they're coming from. And that's why Sam was able to justify to himself taking the risk for all of these people who had trusted him, which is that like these bright lines, and it's one of the pieces of testimony that's really damning from Carolyn Ellison, saying that Bankman-Fried had told her that under utilitarianism, under the fundamentals beneath this effective altruism stuff, rules like don't lie and don't steal don't apply under utilitarianism. And that's Sam's understanding. That is not, a lot of utilitarians will say that's not fair or accurate, but a lot of critics of utilitarianism, which is basically like, do the ends justify the means? That's Correct. The question here.
Right,
and EA, as much as they will argue against it, EA's fundamental structure, effective altruism and rationalism, it's all about the ends justify the means. And inherent to that, which is another big topic of the book, and maybe we can talk about what I have planned for my next book, but inherent to that is they love to talk about IQ. And they love to talk about, like, I know better than, or like implicit in a lot of this is we know better than you. We're the sort of technomancers. We can predict what's going to happen. Another one of the big...
it goes back to, I guess, to some extent they believe in... Was it Aristotle in the Greek philosophy when he believed that there should be certain humans who are ruling over everyone else and make the decisions?
Yeah, I mean, they think they're the philosopher kings.
They believe that they know best and they can... And do you believe... what I'm interested in, obviously, we know he's a criminal, Sam, and he's a sociopath. Do you believe the other effective altruism, they also, there's no actually end goal of maximizing utility? In fact, it's purely self-interested.
Well, those are the same thing, and that's where the real like hollowness at the center of all of this becomes clear. Which is, if you believe in like maximum leverage, if you believe that thinking rationally allows you to confidently make bets at very high risk, which is what Sam was all about. Essentially, he stole everybody's money because he believed that he was going to be able to make the right investments and grow FTX to such a point that he could pay everybody back. It was just a leveraged bet, right? Yeah, and of course he was wrong. And really comically wrong, because he actually had been in crypto for a while, and he knew that crypto experiences these big drawdowns where, like, if you're levered, you get blown up. And so he just got, like, the collapse of FTX was in some sense just like one of history's biggest margin calls. And he got blown up. But he did it in the first place because he believed that he was smarter than everybody else. All of the EA movement believes that it's as a collective, and especially the rationalists are so far up their own asses they can't see, and they just like they wind up in these bad situations where and the more sort of dramatic illustration of this, which I was sort of starting to get worried that the book was going to be outdated, but then these guys just keep making more mistakes that make the point for me. And the big one was just in February we had the Zizians, which is this actual cult that is killing people in like genuinely kill. They murdered like 5 people allegedly.
Oh
And
my
they're
God.
motivated by like preparing the way for the AI superintelligence. Based,
Really?
yeah.
No way. Wow.
And I don't really know where I was going with this, but yeah,
Yeah.
EA has this like utilitarian mindset combined with a very high self regard. Toby Ord is kind of one of the other two main leaders of this, and it's insane. He has this big book called The Precipice, which is about extinction risk. It's about planning for the far future. And he essentially says there's a passage in the book that's so crazy because there's like one paragraph. He's like, okay, I'll admit we can't actually predict the future because and there are lots of reasons for this. If if you read like John Rawls, you just like you can't predict the future. It's just not physically possible. It's not the way the world works. But Toby Ord, in his book about far future extinction risk, basically says we can't predict the future, but we should still have a global council of philosopher kings who have veto power over all world
Oh my
government
God.
decisions if
Yeah.
they are going to increase extinction risk. So
Yeah.
buried within this like quote unquote liberal, I mean, and Barbara Fried
Yeah.
and Joe Bankman wanted to be seen as liberals. They were
Yeah.
big Democratic donors, but essentially this philosophy is authoritarian at its heart.
Yes, correct.
Deeply
Right.
authoritarian
Yeah.
and sort of in this insidious way that gets inside people's minds and the like racism behind the IQ element is a whole other aspect of it, but
Yeah.
it's
Oh
even
my
more
God.
fundamental than that. Like
Yeah.
the racism is almost like second order. More
Yeah.
deeply, these people all believe that if you're smart enough, you should be in charge. And they just believe they're smart enough because they believe it rather than because they've actually ever accomplished anything.
Yes.
And here's where we
Correct.
get into the self interest versus kind of helping others part, which is if you believe that your investments now will be like amplified by leverage in the future because you're taking risks that will never turn wrong, then the most impactful thing to invest in becomes spreading the word of effective altruism and rationalism. And so all of this money from FTX that was funding effective altruism wasn't, I mean, some of it was going to like actual causes. But like most of it, like actually helping people. Some of
Okay.
it was going to actually like, buying bed nets for people in Africa, which is, one example of like the good side of effective altruism, which is this is a very cheap intervention that saves a lot of lives. They figured that out. They did a lot of that.
Thanks, guys, for joining us today. Super interesting conversation with David Morris. We covered a variety of frauds from Do Kwon, Enron to centralized exchange frauds, and most importantly, the reason behind David writing his book. If you enjoyed today's conversation, you will love our next episode, part 2 with David Morris. So please make sure to stay with us, where we go into much greater detail about effective altruism and the philosophy behind Sam Bankman Fried, and much, much more. Please turn your notifications on and see you in part 2.